what I would like to start in Georgia is a culture change on this issue, such that texting and driving, looking at your phone, and so forth, is as taboo as drunk driving. I've said it before at the press conference, I've said it here again. Texting and driving, distracted driving, overall, is the DUI issue of our generation. Now, there's a lot of data and a lot of details, Mr. Chairman, but happy to answer questions, and I'm sure we'll have a thorough discussion.
Thank you. Thank you for that high-level look. Members, if you have not looked at the report of the study committee, I would actively encourage you to do that. This is obviously just a hearing today. Take the next couple of days, really do a deep dive into it, peel back the onion, as Representative Carson said, and just take a look at the empirical data and see what effect that may have on your opinion, predisposed or otherwise. Representative Carson, what I'm going to do is temporarily excuse you, and then what I think I'd like to hear, I think would be useful, is if we went ahead and heard from Colonel McDonough first, and then Mr. Blackwood. And I think it's important. Let's just seamlessly segue into the enforcement piece of it, since you gave your demonstration, and then we'll hear from Mr. Blackwood from the Governor's Office of Highway Safety, and then we'll hear from some of the victims, frankly, of distracted driving, and then what we'll do in terms of format is have you come back and answer any questions that we can ask at this time, and then we'll dismiss around 3. Does that work?
That absolutely fine, Mr.
Okay.
Chairman. I would like to ask for the chairman's indulgence if I could sit up here with the family's victims as they come up one by
sure.
one, if that is okay with you and with them.
Oh, of course.
Okay.
So with that, is Colonel McDonough here? Here he is, right in front of me. Colonel, welcome. Appreciate the job that you do, that your staff does, that your team does, and it is a team, for sure. We know you and your team have intimate experience in this issue. Look forward to hearing your comments, your observations. You and your team see things every day that we have never seen and will never see. And so we desperately need to hear about those experiences, the real world, on the road, what's happening, what's happening, why is it happening. Some of the experiences and some of the opinions we know will come from anecdotal evidence, what your team has experienced on a day-to-day basis over the course of days, months, and years. That's fine. Not everything is empirical. Everything is, sometimes it's just personal experience. But when you go ahead and add that up in total, it paints a very clear picture. So welcome, and thank you for being with us this afternoon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Got to throw a warning out there. If I appear to see you on your cell phone, I'm going to call you out during my comments because your attention would be distracted from what I'm saying. What has society done to us with technology? I think all of us have gone through the behavioral science courses in our varied studies, and we see the lab rat experiments where there's a stimulus. And from that stimulus, there's a response. And then with that response, there's a reward. I just described to you the average beeping or buzzing of your phone was the stimulus. Your response is taking a look at it. And your reward is whatever information comes to you, good or bad. So time and time and time again, day after day after day after day, that's what modern society has done to us. I see all the time in these committee meetings where heads go down and things are being discussed and your attention is being divided from your committee meeting because you have a conditioned response to this electronic device.
Just for the record, Colonel, that has never happened in any of this committee's meetings. Just so you and I are clear.
Mr. Chairman, and your middle name is Pinocchio. So we got a great tool. I mean, a great thing that helps us in our life. But what is your responsibility when you're behind the wheel? All of us, depending upon, where we came from and what our training was with our parents or through driver training, was these two things are where? 10 and 2 or 9 and 3. That's where they are. And your attention is divided between what the information the vehicle tells you to operate it and what is outside. And your instructor says you're supposed to spend less than 10% inside the vehicle and 90% of your time outside the vehicle. Well, this is a direct impediment to, that basic training, that basic knowledge that all of us were given in driver training. Now, there is a popular show, it's no longer on, but it was called Mythbusters. Everybody remember Mythbusters were in a very comical way. They would kind of test certain theories. So in this particular episode, they took your average drunk driver and put them through a driving cone course, and then they gave a sober driver with a cell phone the same driving test. Well, the drunk took him to town because he was able to navigate the course much better than the person that was distracted, texting and talking on their cell phone. I think each one of us has experienced driving down the roadway with our spouse or significant other, and we've been driving and we're even just engrossed in a conversation, just a conversation. And our spouse says, or our significant other says, watch out. Well, if you were the one that was talking and just the conversation was dividing your attention, it was that loved one that gave you the heads up that you didn't see what they saw maybe when they weren't talking. So even a conversation behind the wheel of a car divides your attention. Now, I'm from Rabun County, and we have a very clear-cut statement when folks say things that sound great, but they're not. Everybody wants to say, I'm good at multitasking. Well, I hear that statement for where I'm from because the fact is you can only do one thing at a time well. I don't care who you are. You can do one thing at a time well. So we've heard that testimony already that who it's affecting the most are the pedestrians, the bicyclists, the motorcyclists. Three things that already we as drivers, even in our best days, seem to just don't see them. I know as a motorcyclist, I see people that literally look at me and look right through me. I cycle and have ended up on the hood of a car myself. The lady just never saw me. So, there's been an increase of those three things and an increase of the use of this. So if it's difficult to see them to begin with, now throw in stimulus, response, and reward, and where our attention is divided, it should be no doubt and no guess to any of us that the pedestrians, the bicyclists, and the motorcyclists are paying the price of it. Now, the existing law is very difficult to enforce. First of all, we have it broken down essentially by age. If you're under the age of 18, I'm about to turn 55, and I swear everybody I see now looks younger than 15 to me. You know what I'm saying? So put the average police officer, state trooper, sheriff's deputy on the road, and first of all, is that person 17 or are they 19? Right off the bat, that aspect of the law is very difficult to enforce. You essentially would have to know that child and know the age of that child to have the probable cause if they were using a phone to even put them on the side of the roadway. Every single one of us have seen what we're talking about. To me, it's a big duh. You can argue it, you can rationalize it, you can do whatever you want and have your opinion, but when the person that's in front of you or beside you on the roadway, this is what you see. Tell me I'm wrong. This is what you see. It's not 10 and 2, and the eyes are not on the roadway. So right off the bat, we have a problem where an officer who has to have a clear and unobstructed view of what's going on to be able to enforce that issue. So you can meld it in, you can make all the excuses in the world, but we've all seen it. So we have stimulus, we have response, we have reward, and people are dying. It's as simple as that. So you can call it the nanny state, you can call it whatever you want to, but in our job, we have to have a law that can do what? Change behavior. And in order to do that, there is an enforcement element of this. So the positive aspects that I see what the study committee has put forward is they've essentially taken a broken apart law and they put it together where they essentially treat all drivers, whether it is that 17-year-old as a first driver, whether it's a normal adult or whether it's a commercial motor vehicle driver, and they treat them all the same under the law. Isn't that kind of refreshing? Treating people all the same under the law. So I think that's one aspect of it that's very good. And then we take fines and points and we make this thing serious. So as behavior is shown that it just keeps on going and folks aren't doing what they're supposed to, it hurts a little bit more. And so I think there is an element that when you increase that point and fine structure, it does help change behavior. For the law enforcement purposes, if we can determine and we can see that it's in their hand, other than that one swipe or one touch, it's kind of a duh. Do we have probable cause? Yes. So I agree with Representative Carson that as far as the law enforcement piece of it, having a hands-free approach is the way to go. And I know that there are some discussions about access to certain things that there may be a barrier, for the cost of things for folks. But in that rural section of Georgia where I live, when I go into Walmart on Friday evening and see every aspect of our society here, for some reason, they all can afford this. Everybody's got one of these. And so to ask them to be able to go to a hands-free device or that Bluetooth earphone, that one aspect of it, I don't think is so much to ask for to try to get the hands on the steering wheel and the attention outside of the automobile where it should be. With that, Mr. Chairman, that's the end of my remarks.
Thank you, Colonel. Questions for Colonel McDonough? I see a light down there. Was any? Mr. Setzler? Yep.
Colonel, appreciate your presentation. Wanted to raise this to you. I know this is not a time to...
Mr. Chairman, can you just remind me what number you got there? Turn it off and turn it back on.
On? There we go. Colonel, appreciate your presentation. I think there's a real sensitivity to this issue. I think most folks that drive have sort of strayed into that question of being distracted themselves quite a lot at different times. I think there's a level of introspection people have about this, and I appreciate your presentation. What I would challenge committee members to consider, though, and to challenge others as we think about this, is to kind of divide the question. The issue of distracted driving and eyes being off the road is a big deal. I can imagine. I think back to the days when I had a analog tuner in my car. In fact, my son's 1985 Ford Ranger still has a analog tuner to try to tune into a radio station. You have to kind of get it just so. And as you think about how many touches it takes to do rudimentary things like operate the radio, turn on hazard blinkers, any number of things that you're doing in your car in the normal course of things, it presents this issue of your eyes being off the road and being distracted. I think that's a concern that I think we all recognize. I would divide the question, though. I think when you think about eyes on the road versus hands on the phone, I think there are really 2 or 3 or 4 issues here. And I think one issue that I think the presumption that this bill brings that when my hand is on my phone, whether I'm picking up a drink and handing it to my wife, or holding a cell phone, or holding a map, or holding anything, if I'm talking on my cell phone, as I have one hand on the wheel, talk on the cell phone, and drive down the road, is a very, very, very different circumstance than doing what you just described. Because I think the idea of looking down and being distracted by the stimulus response is a very fair debate to have. But I think we need to be very careful to kind of divide the question from a policy perspective. And the issue of one hand being on a phone or one hand being on something else in the car, a stick shift. So I've driven a stick shift most of my life. I have one hand on the wheel as I shift. I'm not persuaded, and I would just ask members to consider as we go through this process, to think about one hand being off the wheel, holding a phone and talking, as being very different than being eyes off the road. Because eyes off the road, I think, is where the danger that you're talking about is really being seen. Because I will tell you, before 2009, there was a proliferation of cell phones. Probably about as many people had a cell phone in 2008 as have smartphones in 2014, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. The issue, I believe, was not manifest in 2008 because people were driving down the road holding their flip phone, talking on the phone. The issue I think we see, though, when you have video content on a screen that distracts our eyes off the road, that's the question we're facing. And I would just ask members to think about flip phones in 2008 versus smartphones in 2016. And I think it's the smartphone internet content that's making the difference.
Colonel, do you want to speak to that? You don't have to. That I don't. You know, the gentleman's question went to the experience that the experience that we're having that is leading to the product, the result that we have right now. Well, from my introduction of you earlier, you have that experience. Your team has that experience. Do you want to speak to the statement or not? You don't have to. If, you're not
Respectfully, Mr. Chairman, Representative Setzler, that's part of the rationale. That's part of the rationalization to the point where we're not even recognizing that the conversation itself that you're having on the phone is dividing your attention. The aspect of maybe even what you're talking about, if it is an emotional conversation, can put you in a state of mind that's maybe not where you should be while you're behind the wheel of the car. If it's a technical conversation where you're engaged in that back and forth, or you're trying to defend a case as a lawyer, maybe it diverts that attention towards that aspect instead of that attention aspect on the roadway. It's just not your hands on the roadway, but it's dividing your attention to what you're doing and what you're thinking and what you're cognitively seeing and reacting to on the roadway. So I understand in a common sense fashion what you're talking about, but in its purest form, I'll always argue that even that conversation is dividing your attention, and it would be best that you not engage in that conversation. And in a humorous way, in 2008 with flip phones, where I'm from, we didn't have service anyway, so it wasn't a problem. It's just now recently, that us rednecks and mountain folks actually got service, to cause this problem. But I understand in a common sense aspect what you're talking about, but I would still hold that hard line that begins that rationalization and that breakdown of dividing your attention away from the roadway.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, let me just, if we could, I need to move on to Representative Blackwood, but just, I'll take to Mr. Blackwood from the Governor's Office of Highway Safety. Sorry, Harris. I might have gotten a chill there. This really does come down to a level of, it's all distraction right now, and I'll take a little bit of the, not so much final word, but just maybe the final word on this interplay. It's all distraction. It is a level of distraction that we're talking about. And the legislation, when you distill it down, is an attempt to mitigate the distraction that is there. We have laws we have law right now in the books, distracted driving. You're eating a cheeseburger, that's distracted driving. You actually turn your head and talk to Chairman Ballinger as we're wheeling on down the road. That can be prosecuted as distracted driving. Is it? Maybe, maybe not. That's an eye of the beholder determination made by law enforcement at the time according to their best judgment. But at the end of the day, I don't think we can go ahead and divide that line and say, well, that's not really distraction. It's all distraction. It's a question of degree. And I go back to the comments Representative Carson made initially in the initial texting law 10 years ago or whenever that was, and I was around, and there was a talk about law enforceability, and there was a thought maybe it might not get a signature at the time. And it almost didn't get a signature at the time. But an argument was made to the executive at that time that if it saves one life, it's worth it. And that was compelling. I think it was compelling then. I think it's compelling now. The gentleman's point is not well taken in terms of what is more of a distraction. We can argue that till the cows come home. But it's all a distraction. It is all a vacancy of awareness to varying degrees, which is resulting in our heightened fatalities, to a degree. We'll come back. So, I mean, we're not done. I know. We're just beginning, but we'll come back. Thank you. Colonel, thank you. Oh, I'm sorry. Representative Gravely, did you have an additional question? Yes, sir.
Colonel, thank you for your Colonel, there we go. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, you may have answered my question, and I simply don't know. So even outside of the context of this, I did want to know this. If an officer, trooper, deputy sees someone distracted and they have a phone, but yet, as you displayed in the beginning of your testimony, you don't know, or that officer, deputy, or trooper doesn't know what that individual's doing in the car driving down the road, they have probable cause to pull them over, correct?
Yes, I mean, if it's a due care issue, if in both statutes, both the old one and the new one, if in the opinion of the officer, you know, that the person is not exercising due care in driving, then that's the broad brush that they could, yes. And then it comes down to exactly what were they doing.
Exactly what were they doing? If they, and literally, I'm ignorant on this point, so that's why I'm asking. It comes down, the conclusion is that they were not testing, they were following some type of a map, app or program. Could that individual or could that officer, deputy, or trooper charge them with reckless driving?
It would be the action as a result that, you know, could end up making a reckless driving charge. If, you know, because of that distraction, you know, they were exceeding the speed limit, 36 plus miles an hour, were they weaving in and out of traffic and cutting folks off, where the demonstrated behavior would demonstrate, a collective charge of reckless driving, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Bodie, did you have something?
Yes, really quick. And thank you for being here, Colonel. Just kind of piggyback off what Representative Michael Gradley was saying. I guess I'm trying to conceptualize in my mind, if an individual is driving down the roadway and they do not have a hands-free device at all, is that right there enough probable cause to stop the individual for a traffic stop in and of itself?
It's difficult to do that unless the person knows exactly what they're doing and, the officer has an indication that they're not exercising that due care aspect, and it's essentially demonstrated in, their driving behavior. I've pulled folks over on the way to out of the house, that are all over the roadway that, appear to me that they're DUI. And when I pull them over, they're not under the influence, but they're electronically under the influence. But, it was their actions and their driving behavior that caught my attention, not just that their head was down. So it manifests itself in driving behavior. It's very difficult when you've got your head in your cell phone to maintain your lane. It's very difficult when you have your head in your cell phone to maintain your speed. So a lot of the same things that exhibit themselves in driving under the influence exhibit themselves when a person is distracted by an electronic device in the vehicle.
And Colonel, I definitely understand it. Well, I guess my question is, if the individual does not have on the headset, the Bluetooth, is that enough in itself without demonstrating driving, erratically or having their head down? Is that enough probable cause to make the stop?
You're not describing a probable cause to me. We know that under the existing law, I think its update was 2010, that the headset for the purposes of communication is allowed. In other words, it even recognized that, that's not a set of headphones that's keeping you from hearing or, being able to tell what's going on in the vehicle. It actually aids in keeping your hands off the device, using that type of thing so that you're not distracted. So in your example, and I hope I'm not misreading it, you're not describing to me something that I've got something I can put somebody on the side of the road with probable cause for. I've got to see the result of it. I've got to see something that I feel is unsafe or is demonstrated that it's unsafe, that's causing itself in driving behavior.
Yeah, and that's what I was getting at. I was just getting at the fact that if I'm driving down the road, I don't have a headset, that's just not enough for the officer to stop me in sight.
No, as you're describing it, no, sir.
Okay.
I don't see that at all. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Colonel. Yeah.
Right. Ms. Silcox.
Thank you again for coming today. I so appreciate your testimony. Was just going to ask, just to be clear, this is my understanding that you cannot ride around with headphones or
No, ma'am.
earphones on?
Headphones, earphones, you cannot. But if it is a device that's like a Bluetooth earphone for the purposes of communication, the law allows you to do that now, an existing law. Yep. That's not considered, an attenuating headset or a set of earbuds, that you're listening to CCR or Molly Hatchet, on the way down the roadway. So, okay, wait a minute. Bon Jovi, yeah, okay.
On that note, Colonel, seriously, thank you very much for your time and for your observations and frankly for your experience. I mean, they're invaluable to the process, and we'll be calling you and members of your team back, no doubt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. So, Mr. Blackwood, Harris Blackwood is the Director of the Governor's Office of Highway Safety, a long-time veteran of this issue.
Yes, sir.
When I think about Mr. Blackwood, I think about what a great job he has. His job is to wake up every morning and to think about what he can do to save lives that day. I think he sleeps pretty well.
Some nights I do, but it's when I get that report sometimes in the morning, it's not the greatest news I've ever gotten.
Understood. I know you're going to get into that. But thank you for your work, and both now and then during Representative Carson's study committee, and we'll be drawing upon your expertise as well as in the next couple months for sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. It's an honor to be before you. Our unofficial numbers as of today show that 1,532 people were killed on the roads of Georgia in 2017. That equates to one person every 5 hours and 45 minutes. If our current influenza outbreak resulted in that many deaths, we'd be walking around with masks and gloves if we were walking around at all. Unfortunately, we treat highway fatalities as collateral damage and pass it off. The good news is that these preliminary numbers show a very slight decrease for the first time in 3 years. The bad news is that Georgia's number 4 in the nation behind California, Texas, and Florida in terms of numbers of fatalities. We kill more people on our roads in states like New York, Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Michigan. In the past few years, 25% of our fatalities have been attributed to alcohol. The other major factor is speed. We do not have a means of saying with absolute certainty that our increases in Georgia are a direct result of texting, but we can say that this type of crash has had the greatest increase is symptomatic of distraction, and we believe texting is a major part of that. These include roadway departures, crossing the center line, striking an object with little or no braking, and overcorrecting. The data shows that our most significant increase has been in young adults, ages 18 to 45. Georgia law already prohibits those, as Colonel McDonough mentioned earlier, under age 18 from using a cell phone for any purpose while driving. The current law passed in 2010 prohibits text messages. Many violators argue that they were making a phone call. A ruling by the U.S. Supreme Court prohibits an officer from looking at the cellular device without first obtaining a warrant. While the number of texting cases has increased, the current law makes overall enforcement difficult. The proposal requiring hands-free usage would make the law more enforceable. If a driver has the device in their hands while operating a vehicle on the road, that driver could be charged with a violation. I want to answer, if I can, a couple of questions that have been presented to me as we have been discussing this. What impact does this have on commercial vehicles? What will it do to business in Georgia? Well, commercial trucks, big trucks, are already covered under federal motor carrier rules that have similar limits with higher penalties. Many of our major corporate citizens have adopted rules for their employees that prohibit cell phone use while driving, including in their personal cars on company business. Here's the one I always get. Is this just another example of the state trying to generate revenue? Well, like motor vehicle violations, the revenue from violations go to the jurisdiction where the offense occurs. The Georgia State Patrol or other state agencies derive no revenues from the issuance of citations. How does this impact lower income persons? Well, you asked a question about hands-free devices, whether you have on a headset and so forth earlier. If you want to mount that car, you can buy a mount, an inexpensive one with suction cups for about $10. You can also go to a store that sells Velcro by the yard or by the inch or whatever and buy a strip of Velcro that will go to the back of your phone and you can stick it on the dashboard if that makes you happy for less than $1. Most smartphone applications have an app, or an app can be downloaded that provide an audio reading of a text message, a dashboard mount that can be purchased, as I said, and many of them have voice activated. You can activate a call. This bill as presented allows a swipe on, or a touch on, a touch off, whatever it does that. You have one move, and that's what you can do. Are the fines excessive? Unless there are significant penalties, there will be no measurable impact from this proposed law. Unfortunately, a few people getting fined will spread the word more than all the public service announcements we can air. It's got to have some teeth in it, or it's not going to work. When I started this job 7 years ago, I got a lot of calls about different things. Roads where people were driving too fast, roads that needed some kind of corrective action, someplace that needed a traffic light. Almost 90% of the phone calls that I receive now in my office are people asking the question every day, what are you going to do about texting? And a lot of them have had to bury their children. A lot of them have buried somebody they love. A lot of them have someone who has been to the Shepherd Center and is having to learn how to feed themselves, clothe themselves, and eat again because they suffered a traumatic head injury because of this crash. It is a problem. It is killing people on these roads, and it's something we can do something about. As I heard someone say the other day, in the early 1980s, Mothers Against Drunk Driving made an effort that took 30 years. It took 10 years to start to get the laws in effect. It took another 10 years to sort of get the message out. And we're now at a point where drunk driving is unacceptable behavior. We do not have the time, ladies and gentlemen, to wait. We don't have it. We're losing some of our best and brightest, 18 to 45 years old. We may be losing the person that could cure cancer, who would be a good citizen of their community, who might be a great school teacher that would change somebody's life. We're losing our best and brightest, unfortunately, to texting and driving. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield to any questions anybody has.
Thank you, Mr. Blackwood. We appreciate your time and your perspective and obviously your passion. When you were speaking just now, the words culture shift popped into my head, and I think about seatbelts, the history there, the generational history with seatbelts. I think about the generational history with DUI, and then on the, I want to say the tail end of the shift in DUI statistics, but certainly within that process, and we're still in it, frankly. It never goes away, but it mitigates or it doesn't. We've mitigated an issue or we haven't. Of course, the rise of technology, ride sharing, the competition in that industry, all helping drive those stats down as it relates to DUI. And now I think with regard to your comments and the culture shift we're seeing, I think it's become, when you compare you combine the empirical results we've seen with fatalities, what's happening in the insurance industry with rates, just the intuitive obviousness of what people see, and not just with Colonel McDonough's passion, but what we see as citizens. You see right next to you see somebody, driving with their knees coming down 75 and texting all the way. I mean, so many people having so many experiences with that over the course of time. And then there's the reaction, and the reaction is manifested in part through phone calls to people like your office or Representative Carson or myself or whoever it may be. And that, to me, signals either the beginning or the end of the beginning of a culture shift. In some states, they've already had that culture shift.
Yes.
In some states, it's unfathomable, and in some states, they're in the stage where we're at, which is, this is happening. It's pretty obvious as to why it's happening. Now the question is, what are you going to do? And I think that's where we are. Is that a fair statement of where we are from a historical standpoint?
Absolutely. We've now made this. We can't be without that beep chirp. We're going to hear what somebody's saying to us or about us or that we want to know about, and we're addicted to it. I tell young people when I go to schools, would you consider driving at 60 miles an hour blindfolded down the football field? And they say no. And at 60 miles an hour, you would go the length of a football field in 5 seconds. And your eyes are diverted from the road. We kind of halfway jokingly say, if someone is drunk, at least they're trying to look at the road. When someone's eyes are completely diverted away from the road, they're endangering themselves and others. And if you want to see the worst place, I would say go to the exit or the entrance ramp coming off of Hartsfield-Jackson Airport, because everybody is sending a text message, "I'm on my way. We picked up Mama. We're on the way." And I think about how many years we went a long time without these things. And putting them down is not going to impede commerce in this state one bit. In fact, it may help it.
Mr. Sessler.
Thank you. Appreciate your presentation today. Think about how difficult it was to train my kids, particularly my 19-year-old, to drive a stick shift car. He drives a stick shift every day, back and forth to school. Do you have any statistics of the safety of people driving with stick shifts versus automatic transmission?
No, sir. Not right off, because they have become fewer and fewer. Unfortunately, most, I think about, I don't know the percentage, but I know a significant percentage come with an automatic transmission. But it is, but you don't have to look down. I mean, when you're learning, you do.
But I asked the question not about taking eyes off the road. What I'm talking about, though, is the idea is you're driving a stick shift. You have one hand on the wheel. You're shifting through the gears. You're working your hands, your feet with the clutch and so forth. You're downshifting where you need to downshift. There is a mental process that's going on to work through the gears.
Sure.
That I think one would argue is much more complex, perhaps, or you could discuss, is it less complex than having a conversation? And I asked the question to illustrate the broader point that are we in a circumstance where one hand on the wheel, one hand off the wheel doing something and going through a mental process is in itself unsafe? Or is the real question, which I think you've made a point forcefully to make, is it's about eyes off the road? Because whether it's talking on a cell phone, having a conversation, or whether I have a hands-free device having a conversation with a person out there that's sort of beaming through my Bluetooth, both circumstances, we're having conversations with somebody that's not in the car.
Well, and let me respond to that with two things. First of all, this is not a perfect answer, but it's an enforceable answer. If someone has that phone in their hand, they're in violation of the law. It's the one thing we can do and look over there and see it. And if they need to have a conversation, they need to have a device. They can 90% of the new smartphones are hands-free devices. They have a speakerphone on them.
I hear the enforceability argument you're making.
Yes, sir.
The challenge, though, is we've got to balance this interest. Is it really a matter of someone's hand holding something and having a conversation that is the root of the safety issue, or is it a different question? And as policymakers, we're wrestling with that. Because if someone drives down the road in a stick shift with one hand on the wheel, driving safely as they're directed to, and going through a complex series of actions with their feet in their hands, that's within the realm of how people drive, and it's within the realm of safety. And I don't think there's statistics that suggest that's a more dangerous environment to drive in. So as we try to parse these questions and weigh the policy issues, I don't see the idea that I'm holding a phone and having a conversation as being a different set of mental processes than if I have a earbud in and I'm having a conversation with somebody out that's somewhere outside.
Well, let me say this about phone conversations. The military, the U.S. Air Force did studies years ago, and the data is still very accurate, where they did it in simulators. Let me make this very clear. But when their pilots were engaged in conversation, either on radio or within the cockpit, they looked out there and the width of their field of vision narrowed.
Right, and their pilots are driving with helmet devices, and they're talking through their mic, and they're talking to someone outside of their vehicle, which is the same as having a hands-free device. So your point is, if there's an inherent distraction of talking to somebody outside of your car, within that circumstance, a hands-free device, the question is the conversation. The question is not where the hand is. And that's the question we're trying to understand, that I think as we really walk through this as policymakers, it's not a question about where the hand is. It's a question about we're willing to accept someone having a conversation in a hands-free device setting, and that conversation's a threshold we're willing to accept. But it's a fundamentally different policy question than where the left or the right hand is.
Thank you, sir. It's an honest debate because you're just to peel back the onion a little bit further. I mean, it's all distracted driving. If you have a Bluetooth in there and you're at 10 and 2 and so forth, are you distracted? The answer is yes. If you're coming down you're at 10 o'clock and then you're over here, but your eyes are still on the road, but you're having a conversation, but your eyes are on the road, is it distracted? Very arguably, yes. There is a level of distraction. That, of course, contrasts with what the Colonel said in terms of looking down. And I think we would have, regardless of where you're on the issue, have to agree that looking down is going to be more of a distraction than being at 10 and 2 with the Bluetooth. That it really is a level of degree. I think to peel back the onion even further, it will ultimately perhaps come down to the question of, can we delineate between the two? I would respectfully submit to you, I'm not sure that we can do that on paper, legislatively. We'll see, and the committee process will vet that out and prove that out one way or the other. If the answer is no to that question, then the answer is, what side do you err on? And that's what we're going to find out. Any other questions for Mr. Blackwood? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Blackwood.
Thank you, sir.
Is Kathy Clark here? Ms. Clark, do you want to come up? And for members of the committee, Kathy Clark is the mother of, I'll wait till she comes up. Members of the committee, Kathy Clark, who's joining us at the witness table, is the mother of Ms. Emily Clark, who is one of the 5 Georgia Southern nursing students that passed away in April of 2015. Ms. Clark, we appreciate your taking the time to be here, the courage it takes to be here. We don't minimize that at all. Just welcome, relax, you're among friends. We're here to try to do the best that we can with what we have. And let me ask you respectfully, if you could, to confine your remarks to about 5 minutes or so, and then if members of the committee have any questions, we'll fire away from there. Okay? Thank you.
I'd like to thank you for this opportunity to speak with you today. This is my daughter, Emily Clark. She was a beautiful, vibrant 20-year-old junior nursing student at Georgia Southern University. Emily excelled academically and was a member of several honor societies. She was very involved in her sorority, church, and community. She loved to help others, as was shown through her chosen profession of nursing. As you can see, her smile could light up a room. She was bright, compassionate, but above all else, she was nurturing and loving. On April 22nd, 2015, our whole world as we knew it turned upside down. At 5:50 a.m. on that morning, a tractor trailer with a full load, going 68 miles per hour, ran into the back of Emily's stopped car, going over the top of her vehicle, then hit the second vehicle with nursing students. He proceeded to hit several other vehicles before he stopped. He never hit his brakes. He was so distracted during this trip that he stated he did not know that he hit Emily. He thought it was a bump in the road. Emily was one of the 5 students that lost their lives during this wreck. The devastation and destruction that he caused with this wreck is incomprehensible. Distraction is preventable, and we should not have gotten that call, and no one should get that call with something that is so avoidable. Emily's sister Haley and I will never be able to help her choose that little white wedding dress. Her father will never walk her down the aisle or have that father-daughter dance. We will never hold her child. Emily will not be there for Haley's first prom, high school graduation, wedding, or any important things that her sister, her best friend, her rock, her whole world should be there for. I'm pleading with you for your family, our family, and for Emily's sake to please vote yes for House Bill 673 and make the roads safer for Georgia and the driving public. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Clark, for being here today. Thank you. There are no questions. Ms. Bacho, did you want to come forward? Ms. Natalie Bacho?
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to let her husband sit here.
Yeah, just pull up that chair right there. John, pull up that chair right there.
We would like to thank the committee members, Representative John Carson, Minority Leader Bob Trammell, and the members of the study committee for recognizing the dire need for hands-free legislation in Georgia. I'd also like to thank you for your time and the gift of the opportunity like this for parents of loss, because we can say our child's name. Thank you for the gift of giving my daughter, Abby, a voice. Our family is no different than yours or any family that you might know. We were busy with life and raising our 3 daughters, ages 11, 9, and 5. Abby, as you can see in this picture, she was perfectly placed between her sisters. She was the glue that held our family together. To say that she loved life was an understatement. People refer to her as a firecracker. Her first words in the morning was never, "Good morning." It was always, "What are we going to do today? Where are we going to go?" She had so many plans and dreams. She wanted to be a teacher, along with many other things. But we truly feel that is where her path would have led her. She was stubborn and strong-willed. Some of you may have a child that resembles that. But she had a heart of compassion for others, especially other children, that would leave you speechless. She was the type of child that when she entered a room, people gravitated to her, and her smile immediately touched your heart. Her life had just begun. She was only 9 years old. We thought that we knew what the future held for us, the plans we were making, the image of what our family picture would always look like, until everything changed forever in a literal split second, December the 22nd, 2012. There is no distance in time for us. The pain doesn't lessen, it just becomes more familiar. Our lives are now defined by before and after. December 22nd, 2012, our family spent the day together, and we had just finished dinner in downtown Noonan, and we're on our way to do what a lot of families do right before Christmas, which was go look at Christmas lights in a neighborhood. Our entire family was in our very safe, brand new minivan, and I was driving because I knew the neighborhood where we were visiting a little bit better than my husband. Our 3 girls were in the van. My husband sat directly behind me, and my father was also in the passenger side. We approached an intersection that is less than a mile from our home that we are forced to drive through almost every day. I had the green light, and as I proceeded through the intersection, not even halfway through it, the only way to describe it is it felt like a bomb went off within our van. And after several 360 spins, I was able to just hold on. That's all we could do, as our bodies were completely thrust to one side of the van. When the van stopped spinning, my immediate reaction was to look and turn behind to check on everyone. And my first sight was my 5-year-old daughter slumped over in her car seat unconscious. My second sight was my 11-year-old daughter crying and reaching for me. My next sight was my husband, who was bleeding from his mouth and making a sound that I can't even describe. People helped us out of the van. When we were standing beside the van with my 2 daughters, when I was standing beside the van with my 2 daughters, like a bolt of lightning hit me. I could not see Abby. I didn't know where Abby was. I had my other 2 daughters beside me, but didn't know where Abby was. So I asked the paramedic to please help me find my daughter, Abby. And he led me to an ambulance where I'm a nurse, so I knew exactly what I was seeing, and it's a sight that I will never forget. The thing about it is you remember everything, the sounds, the smells, everything. When I looked in the ambulance, I saw the paramedic doing chest compressions, trying to restart her heart. From that moment on, my husband was life-flighted to Atlanta Medical, where he would spend 4 weeks in a medically induced coma, which was his only chance of survival. Abby was life-flighted to Eggleston. When I got to Eggleston, my other 2 daughters, one had a broken pelvis, a broken lung, or bruised lungs. Our younger daughter had bruised lungs and a concussion. All of this was caused by an 18-year-old driver who ran a red light as he was in a series of phone calls with one person. He was not texting. He was not speeding. He was in a phone call. Police reports showed that 911 calls were made seconds. He had received a phone call just seconds before 911 calls were made. When I got to Eggleston, there's a series of testing that is done when a child has possible brain death. So I had approximately 36 hours to be with Abby, to tell her how much we loved her, to pray over her, to sing to her. Christmas Eve, she was pronounced brain dead. Christmas Day, she was taken off of life support. So instead of kissing my daughter good morning and wishing her a Merry Christmas, I was forced to kiss her goodbye. The one comfort that we have is that she gave life to 4 people through organ donation Christmas Day. My husband would not know that Abby had passed away until a month later, when he was brought out of his medically induced coma. I had to be the one to tell him. He had to watch his daughter's funeral by video that was recorded for him. He missed approximately 4 months of work. He had to go through rehab. He had to learn how to walk again. He had to learn how to take care of himself again. On paper, he should not be here. And he is a true miracle. You talk about health care costs. Our medical bills were approaching $1 million. It took me 6 months before I could even think about sitting in a driver's seat again. I am diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. But none of this can ever compare to the cost of living without Abby in our lives every day. Hearing her laugh and seeing her smile and seeing all 3 of our girls together. And one of the most difficult things is seeing our other 2 daughters' school pictures change every year. And Abby's will always be her 4th grade picture. There is no piece of legislation this session that has the ability to save lives, save families from experiences like what you'll hear today. There is no bill like House Bill 673. This bill has the ability to save lives for every driver, every passenger, and every pedestrian in Georgia. That is all of us on any given day. That is your families and the people that you love and care about. That is someone's life. That is a family being affected by distracted driving right now in Georgia while this committee meets. These wrecks caused by this one device are preventable. There is talk about changing the culture of how we as a society view the usage of cell phones in our daily lives. The passage of HB 673 is where it begins. And one thing to think about is the driving age, the age of drivers that is approaching, the age of children that will soon be driving. They do not know a time in their life without some form of entertainment in their hand. Whether it be a Nintendo DS, whether it be an iPod Touch, whether it be their parents' cell phone, whatever it is, they are a generation that has never not known that instant gratification. With the passage of this bill, again, you have the ability to save lives and to prevent the pain of more families and the grief cycle that is never ending. And trust me when I say that no one is immune. Please save a mother, a father, a sister, a brother, a child like Abby. Please remember our loved ones. Please remember their names and the lives taken from them because of those who put the phone before the privilege and responsibility of driving. Thank you.
Thank you both for coming and for sharing your experience, however difficult it certainly was. Thank you. Let me ask finally, Ms. Sherry Madliak. Ms. Madliak, welcome. And let me ask you, to the extent that you can, if you could limit your comments to around 5 minutes or so, give or take. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Sherry Madliak. On Tuesday, June 20th, 2000, at 9:16 p.m., my son Parker was born. On Monday, February 9th, 2015, at 9:26 p.m., my son Parker was killed by a distracted driver. This is a general term for a behavior that caused such great loss in my life, changing it forever. In 2000, I was a joyful mother of 2 sons. My first son had a brother, my sister a nephew, and my parents another grandchild. In 2015, we lost a son, a brother, a grandson, a nephew, and my young grandson lost an uncle. Young teens lost a friend, a typical young teenager who loved skateboarding. Parker had a great sense of exploration and enjoyed his increasing freedom. He's remembered by many for his laughter and sense of fun. He was gentle and kind, and we will never know what the world lost. My 14-year-old son felt safe in our community, telling me all the time, "Nothing ever happens here, Mom." he was walking home from a friend's house along our road in our rural neighborhood when a 17-year-old boy, distracted by his cell phone, swerved off the road and ended Parker's life. After the impact, the driver did not stop, later coming to the conclusion he had hit a deer and then posting the picture of his damaged truck on Facebook. It was through social media that he was found. My oldest son, Aaron, called the driver and informed him of the truth. At this point, I want to talk about cell phones and social media. I have a phone and Facebook. These are all part of society and are not bad. The cell phone allowed us to locate Parker's body. After being unable to reach him on his cell phone and driving the neighborhood looking for him, I called 911 and the officers were able to ping his phone and locate his body. The automobile industry, the cell phone industry, law enforcement, and public safety are all working to develop better methods and technology to combat the dangers of texting, talking, sharing, using social media, taking pictures, even playing games while driving. These tools help drivers put away their phones, drive hands-free without distraction. But this is all for nothing if the laws of our state do not support their efforts. The 17-year-old whose life was also changed that night he killed my son was convicted of texting and driving and served 12 months probation. It doesn't take half a second to swerve that wheel and hit another driver, a mailbox, a bush, a tree, a child, my child. The damage and loss statistics are clear. What I want you to hear is the sound of human loss. There must be many more deaths before this gets to the level of drinking and driving. When will protecting citizens from the dangers of cell phone use be as important? How many more Parkers must be lost to the future? I sit at a traffic light and see people all around me texting and talking and not paying attention to where they are or what they're doing. This carelessness took my son. He will not graduate or drive a car or get married or have kids of his own. This loss will always be hard. We will always miss him. I think about that Monday, every minute. Today, on this Monday, I ask you to join me and think about the loss of Parker and so many others whose lives are changed because of a moment on a cell phone. Please say yes to HB 673. Thank you.
Thank you very much for taking the time to be here. We do appreciate it. So, Mr. Carson, that's where we're at right now is we've been through the witness list. We're not going to have any further public testimony today. That would more than likely occur at any future subcommittee and or full committee meeting on the legislation. That'll be figured out procedurally subsequent to this meeting. We do have some time. I think it would be useful if you could do a run-through of sorts on the bill.
Yeah.
I don't know that it would be a run-through that we would see in a markup, but to the extent that we can start digging on it for full committee members' benefit, that would help, even if the bill does ultimately go to a subcommittee for markup initially. It'll still help when we have the time. And I think in terms of getting into some of the specifics of some of the larger points we've heard today from Colonel McDonough, from you, from Mr.
Yes.
Blackwood, that'll help tie it up for again, committee or subcommittee consideration. So you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm happy to do that, but it's hard to follow that. If you don't mind, if I could ask the committee's indulgence, I just appreciate a round of applause for the victims that were brave enough to come out. Mr. Chairman, very briefly, what the bill does, and we can go line by line in here in just a minute. What the bill does is it asks Georgia to go to a hands-free state, whereas drivers would be allowed to touch the phone once to answer or swipe it once to answer, touch or swipe to end a phone call, and still use GPS navigation. I think Commissioner Blackwood, or Director Blackwood mentioned a spring-loaded device. This is what we're talking about. This is all that we're talking about. And this little contraption is probably $24 at most any retail outlets all over the state. Sticks into your air conditioning vent, sticks into your dash somehow, and is one less distraction. The bill also increases the fines. Many people have accused this bill, as well as myself, as a money generator. This last thing I want, this money does not generate for the state patrol, doesn't generate for this, not intended to generate for the general fund. What this is intended to do is it's intended to have teeth, and it's intended to reimburse costs back to trauma care funding across the state. It also increased the points from 1 point on a citation for distracted driving up to 3 points for the first citation and 4 points for citations after that. It also increases the criminal penalties for distracted driving. I have had some conversations with your committee about refining that. But just walking through the bill, you can see on lines 41 and 43, increase of the points from 1 point. And we, lines 72 all the way to 91 talks about the definitions. When we talk about hands-free, there was one thing that came out in this study committee report from the Prosecuting Attorneys Council. It came from the PAC in regard to simplification. We just need to be simple, clear, and enforceable. We had 3 statutes. We're collapsing that into one, and as you will see. 97 line 97 starts a more or less the meat of the bill. No individual shall operate a motor vehicle on any highway while conducting wireless communication without a hands-free accessory engaged, using more than a single touch or swipe of a finger, or reaching for a wireless telecommunication device. I can't tell you the number of times that I have heard horrific crashes that have happened, not because of texting, not because of phone use, not because of internet browsing, but because someone is reaching for that piece of hardware, reaching for that device. Lines 108 begin the discussion of the monetary fines. Lines 137 discuss using these monies to offset the direct and indirect costs associated with a trauma care system. Again, this is not a revenue grab. This is about curtailing driver behavior and making the public more safe. So I would like to point out on lines 156, which is 40-6-241.1, this is in regard to, this as well as line 198, 40-6-241.2. These are in regard to, again, the Prosecuting Attorneys Councils, State Patrol, Governor's Office of Highway Safety, of simplifying the distracted driving statute as it stands currently. Collapsing the 3 into 1. And then the criminal penalties start on lines, lines 241 and 254, equating distracted driving in the cases of severe bodily injury and manslaughter to that of drunk driving, DUI. So with that, I'm happy to go through the bill in detail. I appreciate the chairman's indulgence to listen to the victims' families, as well as our public safety personnel.
I think what I am going to do, just from a procedural standpoint, is we will take the bill and assign it to the subcommittee Crimes Against Persons, Property, and Public Administration that's chaired by Representative Reeves, by the vice chairman of the committee, for purposes of consideration and markup. That being said, it would be helpful, I think, in case members of the full committee who may not be on that subcommittee right now, prior to that markup, if they have any high-level questions they want to ask about specific provisions of the bill, if you want to take those questions now, if you want to, or you can hold for subcommittee.
Sure, I'm happy to do whatever
Okay.
the committee pleases.
Okay.
Mr.
Any
Chairman.
members, understanding that first time seeing the bill potentially, and we've done a quick run through on any of the specific larger sections as the author has outlined them. Many questions from members of the committee at this time. It's not a one-time shot, but since we're here, any questions from members of the committee as of now?
I would appreciate the chairman's indulgence on one thing.
Sure.
I've had people tell me that you're invading on my personal liberty and what have you. This is all about saving lives. I need each one of you to look at me and understand that. This is about saving lives. Based on the data and the success rates in other states, if you multiply, say, an 18, 20% decrease in fatalities times our Director Blackwood mentioned 1,532 lives lost last year. You're easily talking about saving in the neighborhood of 300 lives every year. 300 lives. You're talking about saving a high school class of people every single year by changing behavior, by changing the culture, and that starts with changing the law. This has always been, well, actually it started off with looking at insurance premiums, insurance claims, crashes. What started out as, Mr. Chairman, as a mathematical exercise or a consumer exercise has ended up an exercise about public safety and saving lives.
Questions for the author? Vice Chair. Ms. Price.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. 18.
You're on.
Oh, okay. And this may just be not knowing on my part, and I could probably ask somebody later, but I'm going to ask it now while it's on my mind. In Section 1, all those different points that can, I guess, get up to 15 pretty quickly, can more than one category be racked up in any given offense? I mean, or any given incident?
I believe so, but I would defer to public safety on.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Thank you.
Vice Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Representative Carson, I just want to say this, and really to address everybody in the room. I know that there are a lot of people in the room right now that are extremely invested in this issue and are going to be very involved with this piece of legislation as it follows through. And I look forward to the opportunity to be involved with this piece of legislation at the subcommittee level. I am committed to taking as much time as necessary to devote whatever it is that we have to devote to this issue to get the best piece of legislation out of this committee. I do believe that something needs to be done, that is time for us to act on this. And this committee works very hard. There will certainly be discussions and ideas and changes, and most of the legislation that I have filed in the House of Representatives has come through this committee, and my own bills that go through my own subcommittee that I chair oftentimes change. But I will tell you that when we get to the end of that process, and it's usually a pretty good bipartisan process, this committee does a great job focusing on policy, and I feel that when we get to the end of that process, I feel very proud of the work that we do on important issues like this. And I look forward to working through this. And again, I intend to devote as much as it takes in order to make sure that we get the best piece of legislation out that we can possibly get out of this committee. So thank you, and thank you to all of you for your engagement and for being here.
Thank you, Representative Reeves. If I may, to the chairman, thank you, Representative Reeves, for saying that. I think our county solicitor is here to make sure both of us work on this pretty hard. We're going to answer to him if we don't, I think. Earlier, yes, Representative Lumsden is here. He was on the study committee. He's made a point several times in study committee, and as a retired state trooper, I think it's worth noting. You don't have the legal right to do whatever you want to do on a public thoroughfare. This is about public safety. I don't want to know what you're doing on your phone. I'm not asking AT&T or Verizon for your phone records just to see what you're doing. I want to make sure you're paying attention so you're not risking my life, your life, or the lives of the general public altogether. This is all about public safety. You don't have a right to do whatever you want to do when it comes to a public thoroughfare. And if I may, one other point, Mr. Chairman, based on recent trends, that if we were to not address this issue and not curtail this driver behavior, because this is all about behavior, and enabling our friends with the state troopers and the police departments and the sheriffs to enforce the law. If we don't do this, there is no end to how much insurance premiums will go up. There's no end to how much insurance claims will go up, or crashes, or fatalities, or more stories like you just heard that are tear-jerking. And I want to point out that in our home county, to the chairman and the vice chairman, Smyrna just passed a hands-free ordinance. And that ordinance goes into effect, as I understand it, April 2nd. I mean, I can check that, but I believe it goes into effect April 2nd. The city of Smyrna and possibly other cities and counties are looking, other cities and counties are looking at doing something very similar. Clayton County is looking at doing something like this. Sandy Springs may be looking at doing something like this in 2019, if I understand that, Representative Silcox. What I would say to the chairman and the vice chairman and the committee and this General Assembly and the governor's office, if we do not do this, there is no end to the increasing fatalities, the crashes, and so forth. But if we don't do it, something at a state level with teeth and curtail this behavior, we're going to have a patchwork of various pieces of city ordinances and county laws, such that if I'm driving through Bibb County, I can do this with my phone, but if I'm driving through Fulton County, I can do this over here, or this in Smyrna, or this in Alpharetta, or this in Waycross, or this in Savannah. We need to have a clear, enforceable statute that saves lives.
Gentleman makes a really an excellent point. I'm glad he brought it up. We see it, you can make the analogy with the federal government over the course of time. And
I don't want to make any analogies to the federal government this time.
Over the course of time, when you see as issues emerge and grow organically, when the federal government fails to act on an issue that is of importance to the nation, to a majority of the nation, what inevitably ends up happening is that the states end up acting on their own, just on sometimes a combination of political energy, frustration, passion, however you want to describe it. But it happens, it's very organic in its process. The states act where the federal government fails. This is an emerging example of the city of Smyrna. I don't know if they're the first or the only, but they're, as the gentleman says, and I think he's absolutely right, they're the first. When that kind of initiative comes from the grassroots, from localities, from local government, it tells you that there's a level of frustration, that they feel as if they have to do something. Why? Because there's been so much feedback locally as to what's going on. And if there's been that level of feedback in Smyrna, there's certainly been in Marietta or in Raven County or in South Georgia or wherever. And so then that feeds a push here at this level. So I think the gentleman's point is well taken, that Smyrna is just, if it's the first, it's not going to be the last.
Absolutely.
And we do well to go ahead and get some enforceable standards out there for law enforcement sooner rather than later. So
for the job they do for us, the risk they take, I think that's the least that we can do for our friends in public safety.
this is something, given my years of experience, is that from my years of experience, I know better than to do this, but I'm going to give Mr. Setzler the last word for this meeting.
Mr. Chairman, I just appreciate the author, and I appreciate those who've not worked on a bill. You guys are working with the consummate gentleman here and Representative Carson. I will tell you that any bill like this doesn't do a thing this bill does 6 or 7 different things and how it functions. I think everybody in this room wants to advance the cause of safety. I think all of us recognize that. I think the challenge that I would ask folks to consider is even you look at places like Smyrna, it was really a very divided question. I understand one member recused themselves from the vote. It was the mayor broke the tie. There's a very divided question, not about the issue of safety, because I think we're thoroughly committed to it. The question is, what are the right elements of this, the pieces of this house we're building to make this right? And I think as Vice Chairman Reeves said, the people in this committee care deeply enough about this process to have that vigorous discussion. And I appreciate your indulgence of the committee, and we'll have the discussion, but everybody here's committed to that. But I do think I think this committee, if any committee in the legislature, is called to ask hard questions about the different 7 or 8 pieces of this and analyze every one. So I appreciate your just being part of the process.
Thank you, Representative Chairman Sessler.
Well, excellent points, and it's the very definition of the legislative process, and we'll get there. We're adjourned.